No one tells you this before moving to Canada, but almost every immigrant eventually discovers it on their own. It's not about the cold, the cost of living, or even making friends. It's something deeper, something invisible, quiet, but powerful enough to shape your entire experience in this country. And it's what many newcomers only realize after months of confusion. The truth is, Canada runs on an unwritten rule that isn't written in any handbook, rarely spoken out loud, and almost impossible to notice until you feel its impact. If you've ever wondered why settling in Canada feels harder than you expected, this might be the reason. This rule affects everything: how people treat you at work, how neighbors interact with you, how quickly or slowly friendships develop, and even how romantic relationships unfold. It's so deeply embedded in Canadian culture that most Canadians themselves don't even recognize they're following it. They just assume everyone understands how things work here. But immigrants don't have that understanding, and without it, they're left feeling confused, isolated, and sometimes even hurt by interactions that seem friendly on the surface but never go deeper. Today, we're finally talking about this hidden rule that controls social life in Canada, the one that nobody warns you about but everyone experiences once they arrive. In the first few weeks, Canada feels incredibly welcoming. People smile, say sorry, open doors, and ask how you're doing. But slowly, you begin to sense something different, a distance you can't quite explain. You attend gatherings where everyone is polite, but you leave feeling like no real connection happened. You try to socialize, but conversations stay polite and surface level. You start asking yourself, why does everything feel friendly, but not close? That confusion isn't your imagination. It's the effect of Canada's unspoken rule, a rule that shapes how Canadians interact, how friendships form, and how much access outsiders really get to their lives. At first, you blame yourself. You wonder if you're not interesting enough, not friendly enough, or if you're somehow missing social cues. You replay conversations in your head, analyzing what you might have said wrong. But the truth is, you're not doing anything wrong. You're simply encountering a cultural pattern that operates beneath the surface of every interaction. Canadians are trained from childhood to maintain this pattern, and they do it so naturally that it feels invisible to them. But to you, as an outsider, it feels like an invisible wall that you keep running into no matter how hard you try to connect. And the worst part? Nobody acknowledges the wall exists, so you're left wondering if you're imagining the whole thing. This rule appears everywhere once you know what to look for. You notice it at work, where everyone gets along, but personal boundaries stay thick and unshakable. You notice it in neighborhoods, where people smile but rarely move beyond greetings. Even dating feels affected, warm at first, then suddenly distant. Many immigrants interpret this as rejection or assume they're doing something wrong. But the truth is, Canadians are following a cultural guideline that keeps social interaction comfortable but controlled. And unless you understand it, you'll always feel like you're on the outside looking in. The rule shows up in subtle ways that are easy to miss individually, but create a clear pattern when you see them together. Coworkers who chat pleasantly every day but never invite you to lunch outside of work. Neighbors who wave and ask about your day but never suggest getting together. People who seem genuinely interested in your stories but never share much about themselves in return. Dates that go well but then fade into polite distance without explanation. All of these experiences point to the same underlying principle. A principle that governs how Canadians manage social boundaries and protect their personal space. Once you recognize the pattern, you can't unsee it. You start noticing it everywhere, in every interaction, and you realize it's not about individual people. It's about the entire culture operating according to rules you were never taught. So what is this rule? It's something many sociologists call the distance barrier. In Canada, emotional closeness is earned extremely slowly and almost never rushed. Canadians protect their personal space, and not just physically. They protect their emotional space too. They prefer relationships to build naturally over long periods of repeated interaction. This means they rarely make new friends quickly, they avoid oversharing, and they see direct approaches as uncomfortable. Immigrants who come from more expressive or social cultures feel this instantly. Not because people are cold, but because they are cautious, structured, and intentionally measured. The distance barrier isn't about rudeness or exclusion, it's about control and comfort. Canadians grow up learning that forcing closeness is inappropriate, that respecting boundaries is essential, and that trust must be earned gradually through consistent, low-pressure interactions over time. This creates a social environment where surface-level politeness is abundant and expected, but deeper connection requires months or even years of patient, steady presence. Canadians don't share personal information casually. Don't invite new acquaintances into their homes quickly, and don't commit to friendships without significant observation and interaction first. To someone from a culture where warmth, openness, and quick bonding are normal, this approach feels cold and rejecting. But to Canadians, it feels safe, respectful, and appropriate, the only proper way to build relationships that matter. This rule can make settling in Canada feel lonely, even if the country looks friendly on the surface. You may feel ignored even when people think they're being polite. You may struggle to form close friendships because Canadians don't open up casually. You might think you're being excluded when in reality, you're simply moving faster than the social pace Canadians are comfortable with. And because no one teaches this rule, immigrants often internalize it as a personal failure. They wonder why they can't break in, not knowing the system was never designed for quick social integration. The emotional toll of this experience can be significant. Immigrants often arrive in Canada feeling optimistic and ready to build new connections, only to find themselves months later feeling more isolated than they've ever been. They attend events, join clubs, show up to gatherings, but still can't seem to move past surface-level interactions. They start doubting themselves, questioning their social skills, and wondering if something is fundamentally wrong with them. Some become depressed. Others give up trying and retreat into their own ethnic communities where the social rules feel more familiar. The tragedy is that none of this happens because Canadians dislike immigrants or want them to feel excluded. It happens because the cultural rule is invisible to both sides. Canadians think they're being appropriately friendly, while immigrants feel shut out and confused, and neither side realizes they're operating from completely different social rulebooks. But this rule didn't appear out of nowhere. It's shaped by history, geography, and lifestyle. Canada is a massive country with long winters, quiet towns, and communities that value privacy. People grow up being taught to respect boundaries, avoid conflict, and never intrude. The result is a culture where relationships grow like Canadian seasons, slowly, quietly, and with patience. Canadians aren't unfriendly. They're simply cautious, indirect, and protective of their inner circles. Once you understand this, their behavior starts to make sense. And suddenly, the distance you felt doesn't feel personal anymore. The distance barrier developed over generations as a survival mechanism for living in a harsh climate with scattered populations. In small, isolated communities where people had to live together through brutal winters, maintaining peace and avoiding conflict became essential. Personal boundaries helped prevent tensions from escalating when people were stuck inside together for months. This cultural pattern persisted even as Canada urbanized and became more diverse. Today, even in big cities like Toronto and Vancouver, Canadians maintain these protective social habits, not because they need to anymore, but because the behavior is now deeply ingrained in how they understand proper social conduct. Understanding this historical context doesn't make the barrier disappear, but it does help immigrants stop taking it personally and start seeing it as a cultural difference rather than a personal rejection. So if you've ever struggled to connect in Canada, remember this: it's not you, and you're not alone. You're simply experiencing a cultural rule that nobody talks about, a rule that shapes every interaction in the country. But here's the real question. Once you understand the rule, how do you work around it and actually build meaningful relationships in Canada? That's a conversation we need to have. If you want a full video on exactly how immigrants can break this barrier and build strong connections in Canada, let me know in the comments, because the solution might surprise you. The truth is, there are specific strategies that work. Ways to navigate the distance barrier without violating Canadian social norms or compromising your own personality. There are environments where the barrier is naturally weaker and connections form more easily. There are conversational approaches that Canadians respond to positively without feeling pressured. And there are time frames and patterns that, once you understand them, make the whole process feel less mysterious and more manageable. Breaking through isn't impossible. It just requires knowledge that most immigrants never receive. So if this resonated with you, if you've felt this invisible barrier yourself, drop a comment below sharing your experience. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up video where we dive into the actual solutions. And remember, understanding the rule is the first step. Learning how to work with it is what changes everything.